got red lights. That's exciting. Okay, for those of you who don't know who I am, and I see some somewhat unfamiliar faces in the audience, my name is Jennifer Hodgdon. I am J. Hodgdon on Drupal.org and IRC. And I have been involved in Drupal documentation for about as long as I've been involved in Drupal, which is like 8+ years. I've been the head of the quote-unquote documentation team back when we had a quote-unquote documentation team, and we've since kind of changed so that we don't want the documentation people to be separate from the rest of the community. We want everyone in the community to kind of think about documentation, so we don't have a documentation team per se anymore. So we don't have a head of it either. So I'm not the head. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you today about the various types of community-produced documentation that the Drupal community produces. And I am, some people hate to get interrupted while they talk. I am not one of those people. I love to get interrupted while I talk because it reminds me that you might be paying attention. So if you have any questions or comments while I'm talking, just give a wave or yell or something. I can see fine in the distance, not so fine close up, so I'll probably see you if you wave unless I put the glasses on. I hate this. Okay. What are you going to do, right? I see at least one person who understands what I'm talking about. Okay. So, first let's talk a little bit, I'm even going to have to put the glasses on. First let's talk a little bit about the goals for Drupal documentation. Like, why are we even bothering to write Drupal documentation? Can you guys read that up there? Is it almost big enough? Okay. So, this is a set of goals that there's a group now within the Drupal community of 3 people called the Documentation Working Group, which I used to be a part of and I resigned last year. But anyway, the Documentation Working Group is sort of a governance group for documentation. And one of the things we did when we formed as a group, as a working group, was to try to articulate what the goals were for documentation. Because if you're going to try to make a good documentation, you should know what you're aiming for. So here's a set of goals, and they're mostly taken from the goals that the Documentation Working Group has set up, which are on this page called Drupal.org governance doc wg/goals. So the first thing is that we should have documentation for themers, programmers, site builders, and content editors. That documentation should exist somewhere. Within that, you want to have topical documentation, like how to solve a problem, and tutorial documentation, how to learn stuff. And the difference is, like, if I am a site builder and I need to solve some problem, I'm going to go look for a topic on, whatever problem it is, how to do something. And I just want that documentation to answer the question I have right now. And I have a particular question in my mind. So that's kind of topical style of documentation. Tutorial documentation, the different thing is you may not even know what the questions are, and you need to say, I have a certain skill level, I want to get to this skill level, how do I even get from A to B? And you need more of a tutorial or somebody to tell you what the important things are that you need to learn, as opposed to just knowing what the question is and being able to find the answer. And both types of documentation need to exist, and they're not really the same, or at least they're not organized in the same way. Third goal is that documentation should, in theory anyway, exist in all languages supported by Drupal, and we have about 160 of them. So that's a big goal that we really don't satisfy at all, because almost all of the documentation in the Drupal project is written in English. But ideally, you'd want to have documentation so that someone who speaks, for instance, Swahili could also learn how to use Drupal and get their questions answered. Another goal is that people should be able to locate the documentation they need. That's pretty basic. The documentation's not all that useful if you can't find the information that you need. And ways to locate that documentation, if the documentation's online, obviously a web search is probably most people's first go-to if they have a topical need. Web search is not going to be all that useful for finding a tutorial necessarily, unless you look up Drupal tutorial and you're going to get 5 million hits. The other way to find documentation would be to start from an easily locatable starting point, like Drupal.org maybe, and being able to navigate there pretty quickly to find what you need. And that's probably more appropriate for the learning type of documentation than the topics, because topics, you're going to have to kind of branch down through a lot of hierarchy to get where you need in most cases, unless you do a search. Okay, another goal is that once you find the documentation you're looking for, you should be able to understand it, and it should be accurate. That's maybe not a lot to ask, but good to think about. Now, the Drupal project is open source, so we should have open source documentation. You shouldn't have to go buy a book, but you should have some kind of free documentation, and it should be produced by the same Drupal community that produces the software. So that's kind of not a goal about the quality of the documentation, but more a goal about how we would go about, or how we would go about producing the documentation. And if we're going to produce the documentation, another goal is that we should have appropriate tools and understandable processes for writing and editing documentation, and that community members should feel empowered and encouraged to contribute. So with that kind of framework in mind, those are the goals that I have, or that the community, the documentation working group has for documentation. And I don't think any of them are too controversial. And what I'd like to do now is go through a little bit of what documentation we do have available in the Drupal community, and to what extent it fits or doesn't fit with those goals. And I'm going to go through this. I didn't make a lot of slides for this because I'm not a big lots of slides type of person. And if we have time, I'd actually like to show you the newest documentation project and how you could help with that. And that's my secret goal in you coming here, is that you will all start writing topics for the new user guide for Drupal 8, but we'll get to that. So let's start with the Drupal.org community documentation area. So that's what you get if you go to Drupal.org and click on the big documentation link that's in the top of the site. I'm sure probably most of you have seen that or dealt with it at one time or another. The contributing process for that area is that anybody with a Drupal.org account can add a page anywhere they want, and they can edit just about any page. There are a couple pages that might be locked, but pretty much you can add and edit pages as much as you want. Nobody can delete pages except for super users, which is probably a good thing. You don't want the documentation to disappear. But pretty much anybody can add pages and edit pages. And then there's also an issue queue, if you're familiar with issue queues, like a bug tracker. And occasionally there's some discussion in there to report issues with the pages or discuss changes, but nobody really knows about it, so it doesn't get used that much, and it's maybe not all that useful. So this is a good fit with some of the goals for documentation. So it contains documentation for all the different audiences you could think of. There's some programmer documentation, there's themer documentation, there's site building documentation, and to some small extent there's some content editor documentation. And it's searchable if you use Google. Searching on Drupal.org, maybe. The Drupal.org search is questionable. Mostly the problem with the searching of the community documentation area is mostly that the page titles are garbage. And both Drupal.org searching and Google searching give kind of high precedence to page titles, and people put a page title like, because we have a hierarchy, they put a page title that's only understandable within the context of the whole hierarchy of pages. And so the page title might be installing. So if that comes up in search results, you really don't know what the page is about. It's about installing something, but it could be installing Drupal as a whole, it could be installing some particular module, it could be about installing Apache on your local web server, and you don't really know just by the page title. So that's kind of a problem. It's good as far as being topical documentation, so that you can, for finding documentation to solve your problem. And there are a few tutorials as well. I would say that it's less good as far as documentation for somebody who needs to learn Drupal. And it is an official Drupal community project, and it's it's definitely very much produced by the community. As far as how it doesn't fit with the goals, it's very hard to navigate. It's got one huge, giant hierarchical outline, or 5 huge, giant hierarchical outlines, because they're in the book module. And there's one top-level division into books, but if you ever wanted to navigate to a particular page by clicking, you have to get a page load every time you click, and it would take you an hour to find the documentation you wanted. So it doesn't have a really good navigational structure. The quality, as I'm sure you've noticed if you've ever tried to use the documentation there, is mixed. There are a lot of obsolete pages because there's no real oversight. Anybody can create a page and they never get deleted. there wasn't a roadmap to planning it. It's not planned. People just add pages, and so it kind of ends up being, I like to call it the spaghetti documentation. It's just kind of like a big pile of spaghetti, and you need that strand. Well, where are you going to find it? I don't know. And there aren't really any good editing tools. You have to write your own HTML tags. There's this little thing that will insert the tags for you now, but it's kind of worthless. And it's only in English. So that's the community documentation area. And by the way, if you ever find a page there that's wrong, please click the edit button and fix it. Then you can help make it better for the next person, especially if you know what the answer is. If you don't know how to fix it, but you've noticed it's wrong, you can do two things. You can click edit on the page, and there's a taxonomy on every page that says, is the page accurate, incomplete, needs updating, or whatever. You can just do an edit where you don't change the text in the page, but you change that taxonomy value, the page status value, and then someone else might notice that it's been marked as incomplete and go edit it. So that's one thing that you can do. And you can also go to the documentation project at drupal.org/project/documentation and add an issue pointing to that page. So if you do find a problem, there are ways to get it fixed, or you can fix it yourself if you know how to fix it. A lot of times people know it's wrong, but they don't necessarily know what the right answer is, so it's kind of, they get intimidated by fixing it. But you can at least update the page status so that somebody else will notice that it needs fixing. Okay, so a second piece of kind of community documentation is the Drupal answers area on StackExchange. And I don't know if you've seen this before, but let me go back a second. This is what the Drupal community documentation looks like. So if you want to find a particular page on about I don't know, how to do views or something, you're going to have to go into structure guide, because that said views, and then, I don't know, look at all this stuff. Where's views? Oh, working with views to display sets of content. And then, oh, I don't know, Drupal 7. Anyway, you can just see that navigating to anything in here is tedious, and it's just like everything's buried in about 5 layers of menus. So if you do a search, you can get directly to a page maybe, but then you've got the page title problem. So like, this page has a good title, Working with Views in Drupal 7 and Earlier. At least you know what it is. But not all the pages have a complete title like that. Some of them, like I said, just might say installing. Okay, let's go over to StackExchange here. This is the Drupal answers section on StackExchange, and this is a way to get help on your particular problem or search for somebody else that had the problem. And so you can go to StackExchange and search up here for a particular question, with some keywords, and you probably find something. Or, Google will return these results pretty easily if you search for a question, because you don't have to log in or anything to see stuff. And so people within the Drupal community come on here and answer questions, and it's got a pretty, it's a lot better than the forums that are on Drupal.org, which nobody really uses anymore, because the searching is pretty good, and the best answers get thumbs up to the top, and you can, I don't know, it's a pretty nice interface. So back to my slide here. Let's see. Start from current slide here. So the contributing process for the Drupal answers on StackExchange is that anybody can sign up for an account. And once you've signed up for an account, then you can ask questions, answer questions, and you can vote up or down on the quality of answers. And it does satisfy some of the goals of documentation, even though it's not technically documentation. But it's good for finding answers to things that have already been answered. It does have documentation for all types of audiences, programmers, themers, site builders, and content editors. It comes up in web search results. And there's some related topics navigation. So if you're on one topic, it might point you to some other related topics. So that's kind of good for finding related information if the first search result wasn't right. And it's definitely oriented towards actual questions people have, because that's what it is. It's all questions people actually had. So it's very topical, but not good for tutorials. You couldn't go there and learn Drupal. So it's just not oriented towards that. And it is kind of open source in the sense that all the content that's submitted is licensed under Creative Commons license if you read their terms of service. So in that sense, if you find something there and you wanted to put it on Drupal.org, I think it has a compatible license. But anyway, it's open source content. If you attribute you can use attribution and use the content elsewhere, this basic thing. And it's real easy to contribute, so that's good also. How it doesn't fit with the goals is it's hosted on a commercial site. So it's not owned by the Drupal project, it's not owned by the community, and in theory they could take it down at any time, they could start charging for it or whatever. They own the site, they could put any kind of advertising on it, like WordPress advertising if they wanted to. Anyway, and it's obviously incomplete because your question might not be there, and not all the questions that are there even have answers. And again, it's only in English. But you're going to see a common thread on that one. So, but it is a resource for finding answers for stuff. Okay. So if you are a programmer, you probably are familiar with api.drupal.org, I would hope. And that is an example of an API reference site. And this is a site where you can go to find reference information about all of the functions and classes and things that are part of the Drupal source code. If you are not a programmer, let me just show you what that looks like real quick. This is api.drupal.org. This is the Drupal 7 section. You can search in here for a particular function name, or you can go to the functions page and see a list of all of the functions that are part of PHP functions that are part of Drupal. So this is documentation of all the PHP stuff that's part of Drupal. And the Drupal 8 version has all these really nice topic pages that I'm very proud of that we wrote as a community. Oops. Sorry, let me go back to the Drupal 8 landing page. Anyway, there are all these topics on the Drupal 8 pages, so that if you are a programmer, you could go through here and learn quite a bit about the Drupal 8 programming API. And there's a lot more stuff on the right sidebar because there's a lot more classes and things in Drupal 8. So that's just a quick look at api.drupal.org. So the contributing process, if you want to improve the documentation that's there, is that all of the documentation on api.drupal.org is parsed out of the Drupal core source files. So if you want to improve some documentation, you have to go and make a patch for Drupal core. And if you're a programmer and you've been contributing to the project, making a patch is fine. If you haven't contributed to the project before, you're going to have to learn how to make a patch. So that's somewhat of a barrier to contributing, which I put down here, but I got ahead of myself. So how does this fit with the goals? It's really good documentation for programmers, because if you want to know what a particular Drupal function or class or whatever is doing, you can go there and get pretty good information. It tends to be pretty accurate. Ideally, when somebody makes a change to one of those functions, they also update the documentation, and that happens a good fraction of the time because the Drupal core project maintainers usually require that before the patch gets accepted. So that's good. There's a little bit of documentation for themers. It's mostly oriented towards programmers, and there's no documentation on there for site builders or content editors. So it's just a small subset that it's for. Like I said, in Drupal 8, the api.drupal.org site has some good entry points for learning. So you could actually use it as a tutorial for how to learn Drupal 8 programming. Drupal 7, not so much, but we had to start somewhere. The site has really good searching and cross-referencing. So if you found one function, you'll be able to find places that call that function and use it, so you can look at examples. And it is complete. Every single class and function that's part of Drupal core, even if it doesn't have a documentation header, it's still listed there. So, and it shows the source code. And it definitely fits in with the community written and hosted and open source parts of the goals. So it's not on any commercial site, and it's all in the source code. How it doesn't fit with the goals, like I said, there's a somewhat high barrier to contributing. You have to learn how to make a patch. And also, when you make a patch for Drupal core, it goes through a review process. It's not just going to get added to the source code right away. So if you suggest a change, you have to make this patch file to show what the change should be, and then you got to get somebody to review it and okay it, and then the Drupal core maintainers have to finally add it to the source code. So there's a bit of a time lag. You might see a problem and there might be a month pass before you get it in, so that's kind of a problem for some people. So, and it's really good for Drupal core, not so good for Drupal contributed projects. There are, let's see, the views project and the devel module randomly are on api.drupal.org, and views, did I say views? Yeah. Anyway, the other, thousands of contrib projects that are hosted on Drupal.org are not on the api.drupal.org site. So you can't find documentation about the telephone field module or the Facebook module or whatever. That documentation's not on api.drupal.org. There's another site called drupalcontrib.org, which is very much like the api.drupal.org site. It's built with the same software and everything, and that one has a lot of contrib projects in it, so you can use that. That's hosted by somebody out of the generosity of his heart. It's not owned by the Drupal community per se, and so that site could go away at any time. And then, of course, like everything else so far, it is English only. So that is maybe not so much of a problem for programmers because generally most people that are, well anyway, programmers tend to be literate enough in English that they can at least understand programmer documentation in English because 99% of the programmer documentation that's out there is English only anyway, so they're probably used to that, that factor. Okay, on to the next one. There is a project on Drupal.org that's called Examples for Developers, and this is another set of documentation that's for developers, and it consists of quite a number of example modules, and one of the, you're a maintainer, aren't you? Yes?
I'm the owner.
You're the owner, yes.
Yeah.
The owner of the Examples project is here with us today. So if you want to contribute to that project, you can, there is an issue queue and you can make patches there, and I'm sure your help would be welcome.
Very much.
Very much welcome. And so this is a good fit for some of the goals, as usual, of documentation. So it's good documentation for programmers because it's these extensively documented code examples, and they're written as tutorials, so it's a good way to learn. I think I didn't write that down. It has pretty good coverage, pretty complete coverage of Drupal core in 7. What's the status for Drupal 8 right now? 60, 80%?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. So it's about 60 or 80% good for Drupal 8 and about 100% good for Drupal 7. So it has good coverage of Drupal core, and the goal is to have perfect coverage of Drupal core. But it doesn't cover contrib. It's just for Drupal core. And it is community written and hosted for sure, and open source. The way it doesn't fit with the goals is, again, like the API documentation sites, if you want to contribute, you need to make a patch and get it accepted. The barrier to getting a patch accepted in the Examples project may be a little lower,
Way lower.
a little lower than it is in Drupal core, and English only, of course.
And that's why it's easy to learn the process that way.
Yes. Oh, would you like to plug? Please go contribute to the Examples project. They're very friendly. They would love you. They'll help you through the patch accepting process and help you understand what all the mistakes are and be very friendly. And then when you've gotten up to speed, you'll be ready to make patches to Drupal core and get wider acclaim.
Or something like that.
Something like that.
That sounds like a good story.
Yeah. Anyway, you can find that under drupal.org/project/examples and download it there. And then once you download it, you can install the modules, and then you can go and look at the source code for them, and that's a good way to learn how to make a module and how to do various types of things that you'd want to do. I mean, it covers Ajax, it covers blocks, it covers forms, it covers all kinds of stuff. Really great project. Okay, this is my new exciting project. Sometime near the beginning of this year, so I said I've been involved in Drupal documentation for 8 years plus. Over that time, and to some extent before I even got involved in Drupal documentation, there have been many, many, many proposals to make something that is a curated, concise, limited user guide for Drupal, as opposed to the Drupal.org community documentation, which is this, thousands of pages. We need something that's more like 100 pages than thousands of pages. And so, in the past, I made several of these proposals over the years. My predecessor as head of the documentation, Addison Berry, made several proposals. And all of the proposals were hated by the Drupal community, and we ran away screaming and hit our heads in the sand and went on doing what we were doing. And this year, it went a little differently, and I changed the wording of how I presented the proposal. And I said at the beginning of the year, Drupal 8 is about to come out. We should have a user manual. We should have a user guide for site builders and maybe content editors, but primarily for site builders. Because Drupal, figuring out how to build a site in Drupal is not straightforward, and we should just have a user guide. And so I put a proposal up on the documentation group on groups.drupal.org that basically said that, and kind of laid out some goals for, specific goals for that, and about how big it should be and what it should cover. And everybody just went, wow, we should have a user guide. That's great. I want to help. So that was great. Very gratifying after 8 years of trying to get this done that people finally realized that it was a good idea. I knew it was a good idea all along, I have to say. So we launched the project at the end of June at the Twin Cities Drupal camp in Minneapolis, which they very kindly flew me out there. And I worked with my partner in this project, Joe Schindler, and I organized the guide, wrote up some procedures for how to contribute, and then the last day of that conference is a work day, a sprint day, they call it. And we had a table of about 10, 12 people, and we all wrote topics for the user guide, and our procedures weren't all that great, but we've fixed the procedures up since then. It's now October, and about half the topics have been written. And so what we have in the user guide is Joe and I are the benevolent dictators for the project, and we decided what the outline of topics should be. And we've made a spreadsheet for planning so you can see what all the topics are. And if you want to contribute to the project, you find a topic to write in the spreadsheet, and then you write it using ASCII-Doc Markdown syntax. So it's pretty simple. Like if you want a header, you do equals 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 for a third level header, and equals 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 for a fourth level header. It's real simple syntax, so you don't have to do HTML tags. And then once you have, and there's also a visual editor available, and once you've written your file, you download it from the visual editor or your text editor, and just attach it as a file to the issue about that topic and submit it. And then it goes through a little bit of back and forth with Joe or I reviewing, and you can get it accepted. And as of today, I think we're over half written. We still are going to have some editing to do, but over half of the topics have been written, but there's still plenty more to write. And I would love it if everybody in the room decided to write a topic, because then we would be at 60% instead of 50. And if you decide to write a few, it would be even better. We have, I think, 92 topics that need to get written altogether. But the topics, so the other thing is, so we organized it so the topics are small. So there's a topic like adding a piece of content, okay? And it starts with, you navigate to, content, and then click on add content, and then you need to fill in this form, and then you're done, and that's it. Now, making that content be your home page is a separate topic. We're not covering more than one thing in one topic, so it's very modular. And we've also taken the concepts away from the tasks. So the task is adding content. The concept might be, what's a content type? And there's another one about what's a view. And there's another topic about how to create a view, which is separate from the what is a view. And so that's the kind of thing. So the topics are fairly short, and you could write one in, hour or two. It's not a huge commitment, and you don't have to write more than one. And we have really good instructions now on the website, and I'll show you where that is if we have time, which we will. So how this user guide fits with the goals is it's documentation for site builders and to some extent site editors, content editors, but it's focused on site builders. So it fits that piece of the puzzle. It's meant to be a tutorial, so you could start from the beginning of the book and read to the end. It could be used for finding topics, but it's really aimed at people who don't really know much about Drupal to begin with. You could skip topics if you already know them. Because it's so modular, if you get to the topic, there's a goal at the top of each topic that tells you what you're going to learn. And if you already know everything, you could just skip the topic. So it should be fairly useful for someone who's trying to learn Drupal, and probably less useful for someone who has a particular problem. It is a community project for sure. It does have some oversight and planning. That's Joe and myself. Eventually, it will be available for either reading on a something.drupal.org website, or you could download it as a PDF or an ebook. The same source could be used to build an HTML version and a PDF and a MOBI and a EPUB. So you could put it on your Kindle or whatever, in theory, if you can figure out how to get random files onto your Kindle without going through Amazon. Anyway, and the other thing that we wanted to make sure for this project was that this would be, I mean, it's obviously open source and everything, but it's also available to be translated into other languages. So we have this community of translators for Drupal. For all 160 languages, there are at least some translators. And part of the problem for those language communities in translating documentation has been that there are thousands of pages on Drupal.org, and it's really hard for them to, A, figure out which pages are important to translate, and B, keep up with the changes. And the idea of this project is in a source code repository, a Git repository on Drupal.org. And so it's not, you know, check and see if this page has been modified recently on Drupal.org. You could actually get notifications when a particular topic's been updated. And also, it's all modular. So the idea was that it was supposed to be available for translation once we get it actually written and edited in a reasonably final form. And that it would give, say, the Swahili language community something to point at and say, this is the set of good documentation that we should translate. And I also have a way to make the screenshots in another language by basically clicking a button, which will be very helpful, because it has a lot of screenshots in it. And we can just say, I can just put a little thing that says, you know, do it in Spanish, and here are the, you know, for the examples, like it runs off of a farmer's market example, so here's the text that we would put in node 1 and node 2 and so on. So anyway. And also fitting with the goals, it's really not difficult for anybody to contribute to it, because you don't have to make a patch or anything. All you have to do is be able to, you know, use a text editor, which hopefully everybody can do. How it doesn't fit with the goals, A, it's not finished yet. Hopefully we'll get it done pretty soon. I'm really pleased with the progress so far, because we've gotten half of it done in about 3 months. It does need to be edited. And we do use issues to track what's going on, and that issue-based process might be new to some contributors. Yeah?
Do you have a target when you want to be done by?
We don't. So, our original proposal, we were going to try to get funding from the Drupal Association and hire 1 or 2 people to actually do the writing and editing. But we had so much of an outpouring of, we want to work on this, that we turned it into a community project, which means it is taking longer than it would have if we had hired a professional tech writer to do it. In an ideal world, we would have it come out the day Drupal 8 is released. Don't think that's going to happen, because Drupal 8 might be out by the beginning of next year or the end of this year, and I don't think we'll be done. But I don't think it'll be too long after that. I don't know that 8.0 is going to be usable anyway.
Do you already have stubs of
yeah.
topics then?
Let me show you. Let me show it to you. I can show it on. So we have it on. So this is the project page, drupal.org/project/user guide, and there are links to all of these other things on here. But this is what it looks like. We have it on a dev site right now. It's not on its final home, but right now it's on this dev site. And if you want to go to this dev site, the login, it'll pop up a login box, and just put in Drupal. Anyway, that's all on this page. But yeah, this is the topic list, and you can see which topics are unwritten versus written. And I apparently have lost my internet connection, so I'm not going to click through. But there's a navigation on the right side. It's kind of crude, but it works. These beautiful plus and minus icons I made, so, oh, the minus one just went away on this one. Oh well, there may be some bugs on the navigation, but anyway, you can kind of see what the outline is and which topics still need to be written. And on our planning spreadsheet, there's some more information. Like, there's some of them that need to have a little bit of editing done, preliminary editing done, and there's some issues for that. So if you just like have half an hour and want to edit something rather than write something from scratch, there are jobs for that too. So I think there's plenty of room for anybody who please wants to write a topic.
Where's the link to the spreadsheet on the? Okay.
Yeah, on the user guide project page, there's a link to the in progress guide. That's what I just showed you, and then this Google Doc is the spreadsheet, which I probably can't open right now because I don't think I have any internet at the moment. But yeah, So there's this planning spreadsheet that's all color-coded as to what the status is and stuff. And then there's also, let's see, here it says there's a Get Involved section of this page, and if you click on that, there's a contributor guide that lays out just instructions for what you should do to claim an issue, claim a topic to write, and stuff like that. Okay? So this is the thing I'm most excited about in the Drupal documentation world, and it's my current focus, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to review people's submissions and things like that. So it's been very exciting. It's really gratifying that after all this time that we could actually have a user guide for Drupal. I mean, it just seems obvious, but okay. So kind of winding down here, I just want to mention a couple of other pieces of documentation that exist. So for one thing, need some water. Most of the projects on Drupal.org, the modules and themes that you can download from Drupal.org and the distributions, most of them have they'll have a project page. A lot of them have README files, and a lot of them have some documentation in the big Drupal.org documentation area. Sometime in the next year or so, supposedly, there are supposed to be now going to be areas on Drupal.org for each project, kind of like groups.drupal.org, but on Drupal.org. So the idea would be that, for instance, the Views project would have its own documentation area, so that instead of having to navigate through 10 levels of the main Drupal.org documentation to find documentation about views, when you went to the Views project, it would be obvious there where the documentation is for that project. So every project on Drupal.org is supposed to have its own documentation area. And I think that they'll be taking the existing documentation on Drupal.org and moving it to those areas when they do that, but I don't know how that's going to work. But that's the kind of, the Drupal Association has this Drupal.org roadmap, which if you Google Drupal.org roadmap, you can find it. But that's part of their plan, is that each project, each contributed module on Drupal.org will have its own area. Obviously, Drupal core is not going to have its own area because everything's Drupal core related, but all of the other projects. Excuse me for a sec. So that's supposedly coming. I don't know how well it will work yet because we don't have it yet. Another piece of community documentation we have for Drupal core, and to some extent contributed modules, is that if you install a module within Drupal or use a Drupal core module, there's a help page. If you click on help in the admin menu, there's a help page for every module. They used to be, back in the Drupal 5 and 6 days, they used to be completely atrocious. They were useless, they were usually not accurate because nobody ever updated them. And in the middle of the Drupal 7 cycle, a couple of us got together and decided that that was silly, and we updated all of the help for the core modules, and the Drupal 8 pages have also just been updated. So I think if you actually go to the help page for a Drupal core module within a Drupal 8 site or 7 site, you will actually get some useful information about what the module does. So that's something. To some extent, contributed modules have good help within Drupal, but really not much on average. Another semi-community documentation project is called Open Source Training, or OS Training. They had a Kickstarter project, I think around the beginning of the year, and their idea was to produce training videos for Drupal. So this is a tutorial thing that a lot of people like to learn from videos. And so if you go to ostraining.com, you can see how that's going. It is kind of a commercial project, but I think they're licensing the videos under Creative Commons, which means they're kind of open. You can use them with attribution. On the other hand, they have advertising unless you pay them, so take it or leave it. It's sort of a semi-community project, but not quite, because it's Kickstarter and it's funded and it is commercial, but anybody should be able to use them. So that seems like a good idea, and those are videos for site building stuff in Drupal 8. And then the other piece of documentation that you can find is blog posts, which of course you can find through Drupal searches. And if you're not aware of it, there's also this aggregator called drupal.org/planet. And if you subscribe to the RSS feed from Drupal Planet, it's a lot of people are members of Drupal Planet, and so that when they post something on their blog, you get it in your aggregator. So it's kind of like an aggregation of other people's blog posts about Drupal. And that's kind of useful to keep up with people write interesting blog posts about what's happening in Drupal 8 development, or what they learned at DrupalCon, or it could be anything. So mixed quality, but you can always scan the headlines. And again, those are part of the community in a way, but they're not on Drupal.org. So, it's a community. So the documentation is only going to be as good as it is if people put some time into it. So I would just like to encourage anybody who's interested to get involved. If you're a programmer, you can get involved in writing API documentation for other programmers. If you're a good technical writer, you can get involved in the user guide project and write topics for site builders. And anybody can edit a page on Drupal.org, a documentation page that's wrong, and fix it, or write a new page if there's some documentation that's missing. You can also, of course, write or edit a topic for the user guide. You can go to StackExchange and answer questions in your spare time, and some of those would only take a couple minutes at a time. You can always look and see what the new open unanswered questions are. If you want to contribute to API documentation for programmers, there's in the Drupal core issue queue, and excuse me if I'm talking over your head if you don't know what I'm talking about, but in the Drupal core issue queue, there's a component called documentation, and that's where you would go to find issues that need to be fixed with the API documentation. And also, if you're on api.drupal.org and you're logged into Drupal.org, and you find something that's wrong there, there's a file and issue link right there. So that just even filing a good issue is helpful for pointing out that there is a problem with documentation. And then I put down there editing a community documentation page. So there are a lot of different ways to get involved, and it's only 10 after 3. So, and this is pretty much my last slide here. So if you would like to get involved and you don't know how, we can talk about more of the details of any of these items. And I would just like to give one quick shameless plug. I wrote a book during the Drupal 7 cycle called The Programmer's Guide to Drupal. It's a Drupal 7 version was about 100 pages. Just came out with the Drupal 8 version. It's hot off the presses. It's about 200 pages. And if you are a programmer, you should definitely buy my book, or else go to api.drupal.org and read all the documentation, which I also wrote most of. So just the topics, I wrote most of those too. So that's my shameless plug, and that is it for what I had to say that was organized. So, questions? Comments? Yes?
Is it separate books for G7 and G8?
No, the second edition has both 7 and 8 in it, and usually most of the code's pretty much the Drupal 7 section and then the Drupal 8 section for the same topic, so you can learn.
For second edition?
Yes, definitely get the second edition. The second edition has everything in the first edition and another 100 pages.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, don't buy it. I have a coupon. I can give you a coupon. No, I mean, don't buy it right now. But I do have like a 40% off coupon if anybody wants one. Yeah.
We're using screenshots, I assume, in the book.
Yes.
Is there some
in
guide for consistency in maintaining the same type?
The screenshots in the user guide. Let me see if I can get back on the internet. I can show you some examples. What we've done in the user guide is just ask people when they're creating a topic to make some kind of a rough screenshot. I don't think I can. Oh wait, I think I can show you an older version on my computer here. There we go. I forgot. I have a local copy. I'm not sure if it's totally up to date here. So this is my local copy of the same user guide. Nope, sorry. That was not a good Nope, this is a really old copy. Never mind. I can't show you one. So the most of the topics do have screenshots. We have a guideline that says when you're writing a topic, you should make sure that everything that you are describing how to do, like a task topic, everything you're describing how to do should be described in text, because there's some people that won't be able to see images.
Especially on Kindle or whatever, if you are recording it all the time.
Sure, exactly. And there's just some people who can't see. And they might be using a screen reader, so they can't see the images too. So we need to make sure that all the information is conveyed in text. However, most people actually that can see and can and have a device that can show images learn better through an image than they do, pictures worth 1,000 words kind of thing. So our guideline is that if you are, if you're describing, for instance, filling out a form, we have a way to do that, where you make a screenshot of the form and you make a table of field, value, explanation, or field, explanation, value, I forget which way it is. So we have kind of a standard format for doing that, like, go to the add content page and put this in these fields, and here's the explanation of why you're doing that, or whatever. So for filling out forms, we're using screenshots. And then there's some pages that have a screenshot of like what the end results should look like, so that you can kind of, if you followed all the steps, you should get to something that looks like this so people can see if they've done it right. We have a guideline that says you should do that. Not all the topics necessarily do, but that's the guideline. So that said, people are making screenshots on all kinds of different devices and computers, and they're kind of of varying quality. I have done a proof of concept of a way that's going to automate all the screenshots so that I can make them all, make sure that the theme that's being used within Drupal is the same on all of them, that they're all being produced at the same resolution and stuff. And once we get the guide closer to being done, I'm going to recreate all of the screenshots through some scripting. So that's on my to-do list to do. It's probably about time to start working on that a little bit more heavily. But the whole guide, if you followed all of the steps in the guide, you'd end up with a multilingual farmers market website. And so I can build the site within the testing framework and do the screenshots during every step of the process, because if you read the guide from front to back, all of the steps kind of, topic A follows topic B, or whatever. There's a sequence and it will all work and you'll end up with the right site at the end. So I don't know if that was probably more information than you wanted. But yeah, we are trying to use screenshots. We decided we didn't need screenshots for navigating. Like, we don't need a screenshot that shows admin and then structure and then views. Like, we make one screenshot that shows how to do that, and then on every other page we just say, in the administration menu, click on blah, blah, blah. And we don't use a screenshot for that because, I mean, how many screenshots of the admin menu do you need? Yeah, so trying to balance like having screenshots with making sure that the information is still presented in text.
I'm thinking more of fields and widgets and things, labeling them. If we have a consistent approach to a screenshot app that we're using, and
yeah.
1, 2, 3 for the things that we're talking about here.
I think what we're trying to do is make smaller screenshots so that maybe step 1 would have a little screenshot and step 2 would have another small screenshot of the same page but in a different area, rather than having one big one with annotation.
Sure, really huge ones aren't a problem, but sometimes it helps to have context of here's a couple things together.
Right. Well, if the screenshot's only got 2 or 3 things in it and you describe in text what you're doing, they're not that hard to find in the screenshot either. And I'm not going to probably be able to automate like drawing red boxes around stuff.
Right.
So probably not going to do that.
Right.
Might be able to automate it, but I probably don't want to bother.
Automating.
Yeah. Well, and the reason we need to automate it is when 8.1 comes out or 8.2 and we want to like redo the book, I'm not going to go in and make 500 screenshots again. Or nobody's going to want to do that. That would be really tedious. So if we have an automated way to do it, we can run that and then make sure they all look okay, and go tweak it if we need to. That's okay. Also, when it comes time to do Spanish, being able to just say, do it in Spanish now, and make them all, maybe again adjust them a little bit, but not that much. That'd be very useful. So, yeah.
Right. We'd also need to have a way of tracking that the text is still in sync with what the screenshot is. Right?
Yes. Well, that's true too. I mean, there's going to be some definitely some human processes involved in that. Yeah. If they change the way the block layout page works again, we'll have to rewrite those topics. So somebody's going to have to kind of keep track of what the major changes are in the user interface, the admin user interface, and make sure that we mark those sections of the book as needing to be updated. Yeah. So I don't think we can automate everything. Yeah. But maybe the tests will fail if there's a testing framework within the Drupal project, and that's what I'm actually using to generate the screenshots. And I believe that test will fail if the buttons and things that I'm clicking on within the test framework don't exist anymore. The test will fail, and I will know that. So that's another helpful thing. So, basically the test is going to be following the instructions that are currently in the book, and if those instructions don't work anymore because the user interface has changed, the test won't run.
Another question, I know Drupal's supposed to be now organically able to grow between 8 and 8.1 to get
New features, right?
Is this, are new topics going to come into the book during that time, or are we saying the book is frozen?
We'll have to wait and see. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we can't add topics, and we can make a separate 8.0 and 8.1 version of the book because it's in a source code repository, and it's really easy just to say, okay, let's start the 8.1 version, and we can have both of them exist side by side. There's no reason we can't do that. And so we could have, the version with the Drupal 8 user interface and another version with 8.1 that has new topics. So we just have to wait and see what happens. No one's really sure what's going to happen in 8.1 or 8.2, whether we really will have new features. And the book doesn't cover necessarily every single thing Drupal core does. So, we haven't covered the RDF module, right? Yeah. And, there's nothing in there about making a super high performance site for Sony. It's basic site building. So, yeah.
Is there also planning to maybe have more coverage for author and administrators who are dropped into, now you're working with a completed Drupal site that a site builder put together for you?
So we haven't really addressed that. So, that's always a question. If you build a site and you're the Drupal person, the site builder, you need to make a guide for your content authors for how to use the site. In theory, you could cherry pick 10 of the topics from here and make your own little guide. It's open source, and you could they're all in, each individual one is in a text file by itself, and you could take those 10 topics and make your own book. So I don't think that the Drupal community needs to support that use case as much as that maybe a site builder would need to make a manual for their content editors, and they might write then an additional page on their style guide for authors or whatever it is that's specific to their site. And if they're using some contributed modules that we don't cover in the book, they might need to have some pages added for that we're not going to probably write as part of this guide. Yeah, some feature that they're using that we just didn't cover, right? So, but it is open source, and that means anybody can take it and do stuff with it if they want to. Yeah.
I've just been hearing a lot of noise lately about author and administrator experience. And
Yeah, right. So we are covering the real basic, right?
For every client, but a little bit different, maybe.
Yeah, right. So we do have the basic content authoring topics in here, like how to manage taxonomy and how to add a new page and stuff like that. But it's not the focus of the book. The focus of the book is for site builders. So I personally, I built Drupal sites for clients for years, and personally, I used to spend like an hour on the phone with both of us looking at their site, and I would get people that were at least computer literate up to speed. I'm not saying they never had a question, but it's not that hard to learn how to add a page or edit a page in Drupal, to my way of thinking. If somebody knows how to use Microsoft Word or something like that, they can usually figure it out. But, yeah. Okay, I think we're just about out of time, and maybe in consideration for the next person, we should just call it a day. So thanks for your attention. And if you have questions, I'm going to be around for another hour or so before I have to go get on a plane or go head towards the airport. So I'll be out in the area out there if you want to talk about stuff. Thanks.